Hi, here's a compilation of some of my best takes on patriarchy, feminism, motherhood, capitalism, bunch of other stuff. I hope you enjoy them.
You know another reason why conservative men love liberal women? Because they want to benefit from liberalism. They just don't want to practice it themselves. For instance, most men hate performing masculinity. It's exhausting and they're tired. So they really love the respite they get when they date a liberal woman.
I want to add to this to say, in addition, they think you'll be more likely to have sex with them. Because women who believe in freedom and bodily autonomy are sexually autonomous as well. We believe in sexual freedom and sexual agency, and as long as there is consent involved and everybody's safe, we're not hung up on the premarital sex. We don't have any shame associated with sex. We might, they think, do all the things they've been fantasizing about doing with a woman that they are terrified to even bring up, to even talk about with the good Christian girls at their church. But here's the thing, though. If you're a conservative man who hates liberal women, you could just talk to some of those conservative girls in the church because, according to statistics, they're sluttier than we are. Women of all ages in red states have more sexual partners per year on average than women in blue states do. It's just that in those conservative areas, they have more sex that is unsafe, and they have more shame associated with that sex that they have. So yeah, you can just have mediocre sex with a red state girl. It'll be really unhealthy and horrible for her, and probably for you too, but she'll do it. No need to bother us. I'm going to talk about two videos that I saw on TikTok recently. They're both making the same point about men and their urge to conquer and why they say they want traditional women, but they don't really want traditional women. Take a look.
Thing is, and there are some pick me pixies that do get picked. Like, don't get me wrong. There are quite a few of them that do get picked. But for the ones that, don't understand why it's still so hard for them to, find a decent dude or find a dude that wants them, you gotta understand, they don't want you. They don't. These dudes don't want the trad wife. They want the goth, scene, alt, feminist trad wife. And they want this because to them, it's going to look like the ultimate hallmark for their masculinity, that they tamed this wild, savage woman, that they're so great and golden of a guy that they were actually able to succeed in doing the unthinkable, subjugating and pushing the wild feminist woman into the kitchen where they think she belongs.
But it's not about him wanting a baby, because in between Christina and Amelia, he was with that other doctor. I want to say Emily, but I can't remember her name. They were looking at houses. She was ready to give it all up. She said, yes, I too, sir. My ovaries are popping as well. I see your ovaries have been popping for a long time, Owen. I am ready to give you a baby right here today now. And he said, oh no, I don't want you. I'm breaking up with you. And she's like, because I want children? He's like, because you're not so excited about being a surgeon. This man said it out of his own mouth. He does not want you to have children if you are ready to give it all up for children. This one was ready to put her career on hold. She said, nothing is as important to me as being a mother. And he instantly rejected her. Why? Because he wants to steal your dream.
Now, I was more of a Scandal girl. I've never seen Grey's Anatomy. But from what I'm hearing from Cecilia about that guy, this is a perfect example of this principle that I'm talking about. Apparently, this guy had a woman that was willing to give up her career in order to raise children. But he didn't want her. He wanted to take the super accomplished women and turn them into women that would give up their careers for children. It wasn't about the kids. It was about domesticating a woman, conquering a woman. Pick-me's are not the women these guys want. Now, I'm talking about these particular kinds of guys. These really kind of controlling, manipulative guys who haven't healed their trauma. Sadly, though, there's a lot of men like this. And for these guys, pick-me's aren't the ones they pick. Pick-me's are the ones they settle for when they can't get one of us. No matter what we accomplish in life, women are expected to give it up, to sacrifice it, at least in part, for a husband and or children. It's so expected, it's so ingrained in society that many people are shocked when we don't do it. Even something as simple as our name. The pushback we get in the US for not taking our husband's name. Expecting you to move for your husband's job when you make more money. Or expecting to relocate not even for your husband's job, but he has an opportunity somewhere when you already have something going on, you got a great job in Atlanta, you've already gotten your degree, and you have to move to Boston because he might get into law school. You are expected to pick up and move to Boston by many a people. The expectation for us to sacrifice at all costs for men and children is deeply ingrained in American society. And when you refuse, if you already have children, they call you a neglectful mother. If you are marrying some dude who's rich and handsome and checks all the boxes, people will tell you, oh, you're so ungrateful, your standards are too high, blah, 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 blah. And for the red pillers that might come across this content, you never know. I have a couple of red pill followers that rear their ugly heads now and then. Listen very carefully, guys. It's not the sacrifice that women object to. It's the fact that they're the only ones doing the sacrificing. In most of these cases, men's lives go on as they were. Men's careers aren't hampered by children. Men's social lives, hobbies are not interrupted when they have children. Women take a pay cut. They have a baby penalty when they have kids. It takes them off the partnership track if they're at a law firm or whatever. Children eat their lives in terms of their time, ability to earn money, and well-being. Whereas it enhances men's life because they get the social capital of becoming fathers, but without all the extra labor. And studies show that they get increases in pay when they have children, while women's pay goes down. Now, my radical feminist opinion, we should stop sacrificing anything for anyone. Let men sacrifice their shit for a change. When we get to a point where enough men are willing to sacrifice for those same things women are expected to sacrifice for, then we'll talk about sacrificing equally. But for now, ladies, sacrifice nothing to no one, never. Center yourself in all things. That's not why you're mad, honey. You're mad because we're no longer prioritizing your feelings over ours. Because women are expected to serve men. We're expected to prioritize your needs, your wants over our needs and wants and the needs and wants of our children. Women sacrifice for their children constantly. And we're finally realizing, you know what? We're just going to use all this energy we normally pour into other people, and we're going to pour it into ourselves. We're going to pour it into each other. We're going to pour it into our communities. And we're not going to waste our valuable energy on you anymore. That's why you're really mad. All that energy that men are used to feeding off of, that women give them, all that labor, all that free labor, we're benefiting from it. See, you like to be the only people that benefit from our labor. And the unpaid labor of a woman is getting harder and harder to come by these days. That's why you're mad. Because you feel entitled to women. Because that's what patriarchy tells you. You are entitled to the time, attention, labor, womb, body, whatever of a woman. And that is harder and harder to get because women are getting peeped to the game. That heterosexual relationships, that, building your life and investing that much into a man isn't worth it. That's why you're mad. Ooh. You're just pissed because we're better at being men than you are. This is interesting because it makes me think of that Gloria Steinem quote. We've become the men we wanted to marry. Actually, the full quote is, women are becoming the men they want to marry. Parentheses. But too few men are becoming the women they wanted to marry. And here's a newsflash. Women have always worked. We've always worked, especially Black women, but even white women. This whole idea, this mid-century housewife thing, that's a creature largely of Madison Avenue and advertising. And also, the Department of Defense teamed up with Madison Avenue to create all this pro-nuclear family propaganda as part of one of their propaganda weapons during the Cold War. That image of the mid-century housewife, that is Cold War propaganda. That period, it never existed as we imagine it. More women, married and single, worked after World War II than during World War II. And this book that I'm reading, that I linked to in my last video, it's in my TikTok shop showcase, Caliban and the Witch, tells the story about how women were kept out of the public sphere, how little by little they started closing off the commons, they started closing off and privatizing public lands. They did all these things that completely destroyed the community of women that existed in feudal Europe or post-feudal Europe, and totally cut off all women's access to the market. It was even illegal to live alone in some towns. And if there was a single woman that moved into a village, she would literally be driven out. And of course, there's the whole thing with the witch trials, which devastated women worldwide, both here in North America and in Europe. Another thing about witch trials that a lot of people don't know, I learned this in Salem. Yes, some people go to the Caribbean and land a beach on their birthday. Last year, my birthday, I went to Salem and toured the Salem Witch Museum. and bought a bunch of books. And one thing I learned, which I've just kind of started to scratch the surface to get the details on, is that a lot of the accusations against those witches didn't have anything to do with religion or witchcraft itself. It was a land grab. A lot of those women, they had property and their husbands had property. So they would accuse not just them, but they would accuse them and their husband. And I think I've talked about this before, Giles Corey. Yeah, the reason Giles Corey was pressed to death was because he refused to enter a plea when he was accused of witchcraft, because his wife was already accused and she was in jail, so there was no hope for her. But in order to preserve his property so he could pass it on to his children, he didn't say anything. Before a right to remain silent even existed, Giles Corey was just like, I ain't saying shit. Because he knew that if he even responded to the charges, by law, his property would be forfeited to the government. And then they would either sell it off for pennies on the dollar, or someone in the government, in the local Salem government, would confiscate it. The sheriff that was investigating accused witches ended up living in the house of one of the people he investigated. And I'm going to do some research into the witch trials in Europe to see if that same trend holds true, but I'm pretty sure it does. Because given what I've been reading about in Caliban of the Witch, and that the witch trials were really a way of going after women and cutting off our access to resources and cutting off our economic independence, what little we had, it probably runs true there too. Woodward and Bernstein were right when they said follow the money, because that's where the answers are. Part of my relaxing and healing journey over the course of my leave is doing a lot of reading and listening to audiobooks. And this book that I have been dying to read for a long time, I'm finally getting into. This book is called Caliban and the Witch. It's about women's liberation and capitalism. And I'm not even 2 chapters into it. The introduction has already given me some great gems. This book chronicles the history of feudal Europe and how feudalism and serfdom developed into capitalism, connection to the exploitation of women. And in the introduction, it included this paragraph, which I will read to you now. The political lesson is that capitalism as a social economic system is necessarily committed to racism and sexism. For capitalism must justify and mystify the contradictions built into its own social relations. The promise of freedom versus the reality of widespread coercion, and the promise of prosperity versus the reality of widespread penury, by denigrating the nature of those it exploits: women, colonial subjects, the descendants of African slaves, the immigrants displaced by globalization. At the core of capitalism, there is not only this symbiotic relationship between waged contractual labor and enslavement, but together with it, the dialectics of accumulation and destruction of labor power, for which women have paid the highest cost with their bodies, work, and lives. It is impossible to associate capitalism with any form of liberation or attribute the longevity of it to its capacity to satisfy human needs. Capitalism works because of the web of inequality it's built within the body of the proletariat and its capacity to globalize exploitation. This process is still unfolding, as it has for 500 years. The difference is that today, the resistance has also achieved a global dimension. It is impossible to associate capitalism with any form of liberation. And for those of you who don't understand the position of a lot of feminists on this app who take a slightly socialist bent when it comes to liberation, that's me, is precisely because of what this book is saying. You can't separate one from the other. For capitalism to work, it requires the exploitation of a certain number of people, and it requires the exploitation of all women to some extent. It's just a question of how your class influences the extent to which you're exploited, and what sort of interpersonal freedoms you have, if any, that allow you to avoid the worst of the exploitation. Example, I had access to education thanks to being born with the parents that I had and the timing of when I went to college. I went to college right before college started to get really expensive. It was starting to get expensive, but it didn't skyrocket in cost until after I had already finished, thankfully. And while even as a professional person, I've struggled paycheck to paycheck for most of my adult life, I got a lucky career break a few years ago, and I got a job with a company that pays me very well. Now, this company does not have a great reputation in the global labor liberation market. In fact, probably has one of the worst reputations. But if you've noticed, the reasons why we're very intensely critical of capitalism, not just feminists, but everyone who is interested in liberation of labor at all, is because this system functions on exploitation. The system of capitalism functions on the exploitation of labor. And the most necessary labor provided in a capitalist system is the labor of women. The system could not exist without it. And in particular, the labor I'm talking about is the unpaid labor that women provide, in addition to the paid labor that we engage in outside of the home. And the sad part about this struggle is that all of these groups don't realize that they have the same enemy. This system. This system is responsible for the exploitation of women, blue-collar workers, descendants of enslaved people, immigrant populations, both documented and undocumented, teachers. It's connected to our energy crisis. It's connected to the inflation of the cost and value of various consumer items, like diamonds. Diamonds are actually not very valuable. A very clever marketing campaign and some market manipulation makes out diamonds to be more valuable than they are and creates a demand for them. And that's just one example. The control and exploitation of natural resources at the expense of people who live in those areas, water, oil, etc. One of my mutuals often mentions on her lives that the whole concept of us paying for food and water and how ridiculous that is. And we talk about how in public spaces, which are disappearing, in public spaces, they plant male trees only, which has two effects. One, it increases the allergies of the population. There are a lot of people that didn't have allergies like this, 50, 100 years ago. But because in these public parks and public spaces and also in the areas around these various residential complexes that are, like pre-planned, the land that are the communal spaces is used primarily for beautification. So they import grass from China and India, and they import trees from other places, and they plant only male trees. So you have an incredibly high pollen count because there's no place for the pollen to go because there are no female trees around. And the absence of female trees has another result. It's no option for public communal food sources. Even the serfs of medieval Europe had forests and parks and areas that they considered communal property where anyone could go and hunt and fish, get water, even build like a little cottage on the outskirts of the village. If you didn't want to live in the village, if you didn't want to live under serfdom, you could sort of live on the outskirts, take your chances, take odd jobs. If you were a healer, local villages, most of the healers were women. It was difficult to conceptualize and quite shocking for me to realize that the peasants of medieval Europe had more freedoms and rights in very distinctive and important ways than we do in 21st century capitalism. I'll have more thoughts on this when I finish the book, but those are just my initial thoughts now. I'm very interested in these types of books because in these texts are solutions, because the problems we've identified and the solutions and the resistance to them have been identified and done before. I think there's a lot of great information in these kind of books, and I think we should be buying them in paperback, collecting them, and building on some of these ideas for the modern world.
Matriarchy is already on its way. It's well on its way, and it's happening organically. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Matriarchy's rise is in a direct inverse relationship with marriage.
Conservative voters might not understand the power and impact of single women, of a group of women who are untethered and unbothered, don't have their energy and their creativity and their earning power zapped by having to deal with a husband. But Republicans in Congress and Republican think tanks, they know. And this is immediately what I thought of when I watched Hope Peddler's video. This is from the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative organization, the rise of the single, woke, and young democratic female. And there is some very telling language in this article. Distinct from divorced women or widows, these largely Gen Z and millennial voters share a sense of collective identity and progressive ideology that sets them apart from older women. Attitudes are what most distinguish single women from other voters. And American Enterprise Institute survey shows that married men and women are far more likely than unmarried females. And I want you to notice this language. They said married men and women, but when they referred to unmarried women, they used the word females. Interesting. They're more likely than unmarried women to think that women are well treated or treated equally. As they grow in numbers, these discontented younger single women are developing something of a group consciousness. And this is the important part. Pay attention, listen. Nearly 2/3 of women under 30, for example, see what happens to other women as critical to their own lives. Among women over 50, this mindset shrinks to less than half. This perception of linked fate stands in contrast to survey results regarding single men who report that they are increasingly disconnected from one another while women bond more closely. This is not a temporary phenomenon, and it is much bigger than the bohemian movements of the past. Essentially, what they're saying is that this is not a trend. This is not a blip. This is a phenomenon that has staying power. And of course, you and I and Hope Peddler know that this shit was inevitable. And Republicans don't like it for too many people to have this ideology because solidarity is what women are showing. Single women are the only group that seems to have a solidarity that other groups don't have. Even African American voters, early on, after the Voting Rights Act, we had some solidarity. But recently, and this is because of misogyny, our solidarity isn't solidaritying the way it used to. And that has to do with the growing rift between the political and social ideologies of women versus men, particularly younger ones. Because single women know the truth. We know that our fate is tied to the fate of other women. We think of ourselves as a member of a class of persons that receives specific kinds of treatment precisely because we are a member of that class. Women are starting to understand what Black people understand, that it's systemic. Just like racism, white supremacy is systemic, so is sexism, patriarchy, misogyny. So the single women are like, my fate is tied to the fate of all these other women. And even though single women, I think, have more empathy in this regard, even though I am not in that situation, that particular situation, maybe I'm not bleeding out in a parking lot in a hospital in Idaho, but it could be me. Single women understand that there's only maybe privilege and maybe a little luck. That's the only thing that separates them from that woman bleeding out in the parking lot. We understand that our fates are tied together and we build community. In response to that, we build community and we support each other. And that's exactly the kind of solidarity that conservatives do not want. They want to break that up as soon as possible, which is why they're trying to get more of us to marry and to stay married. Hence the talk about overturning no-fault divorce and these covenant marriages they've been talking about. So as much as these conservative men will hem and haw and tell us how miserable, lonely cat ladies we are, they know how powerful we are. They know how dangerous we are. Just look at their data. This is their research talking about this group of people actually cares about other people and they're empathetic, which that means they're Democrats and we can't have this group growing anymore. This is a concern. We need to figure out how to shrink this group of voters. Stay dangerous, ladies.